In the dusty plains of central Myanmar, where the Irrawaddy River curves through parched landscape, rises a forest.
Not of trees, but of temples. 2,000 temples, pagodas, and monasteries scattered across 60 square kilometers.
They emerge from the earth like stone prayers, their spires catching the dawn light.
Their brick walls glowing red in the sunset. From the air, the view is overwhelming.
Structure after structure after structure, some massive, others small and crumbling.
All testament to an extraordinary civilization that flourished here for nearly 2.5 centuries.
This is Bagan, the capital of the Pagan Kingdom, a center of religious construction.
Between roughly 1050 and 1300 CE, the pagan people built an average of 1 temple every 5 days. The scale is staggering, the artistic achievement undeniable, the historical significance profound.
Ask someone to name Asia's great temple builders. They mention Angkor Wat, Kyoto, or perhaps Borobudur.
Pagan, despite being arguably the most prolific, remains largely unknown to the wider world tonight.
How does a kingdom that created this extraordinary landscape become invisible in global historical consciousness?
Let's establish the scale of what we're dealing with, because it's genuinely difficult to comprehend firsthand.
At its peak, the Bagan archaeological zone contained over 10,000 Buddhist structures.
Most were small, devotional stupas built by individuals or families as acts of merit-making.
But hundreds were substantial temples, some reaching 50 meters in height, with elaborate decoration.
Ananda Temple alone, completed around 1105 CE, is 51 meters tall, built on a cruciform plan.
The scale is staggering, the artistic achievement undeniable, the historical significance profound.
Today, about 2,200 of these structures remain standing, though many are damaged or ruinous.
Earthquakes, always a threat in this seismically active region, have destroyed or damaged temples repeatedly. A particularly devastating quake in 1975 toppled spires and collapsed walls across the site.
Restorations have been controversial, arguing that many use incorrect techniques and materials.
The tension between preservation, restoration, and tourism development is ongoing and contentious. Walking through the archaeological zone, particularly in the early morning when mist rises from the Irrawaddy, you feel the weight of history in a physical way. Temple after temple after temple.
This isn't like visiting a single spectacular monument. This is walking through the materialized faith.
Seeing in brick and stucco the accumulated religious devotion of generations.
So how did this kingdom emerge? Geography, trade, and the adoption of Indian cultural forms.
The Irrawaddy River Valley is one of the major rice-growing regions of Southeast Asia, supporting large populations.
Pagan was primarily an agrarian power, its wealth based on rice surplus extracted from farming populations.
The Pagan Kingdom was founded in 849 CE, but serious development began under King Anawarta in 1044.
Anawarta is the pivotal figure, initiating the temple-building frenzy that would define the kingdom's legacy. But before Anawarta's achievement, we need to talk about the Mon, the culturally advanced civilization.
The Mon people followed Theravada Buddhism, transmitting texts and developing sophisticated religious scholarship.
In 1057, King Anawarta launched a military campaign against Thaton, conquering the Mon capital after a siege.
What happened next was one of the most significant cultural transplantations in Southeast Asian history.
Mon architects and craftsmen were set to work building the first great temples of Pagan, bringing their techniques.
Within a generation, Pagan had been culturally transformed, becoming a major center of Theravada learning.
The temple building that defines Pagan began in earnest under Anawrahta and accelerated under his successors.
We need to understand what motivated this extraordinary construction boom: merit-making and political display.
In Theravada Buddhism, building temples was supremely meritorious, essential for improving spiritual status.
Temple building was a way for kings to demonstrate their piety, legitimacy, and fulfill the ideal of the Dharma Raja. Each king tried to outdo his predecessors in scale and magnificence. The competitive element was real.
Elites below the royal level also built temples, commissioning their own monuments as well.
The cumulative effect was that temple building became the primary way that wealth was deployed in pagan society.
Early pagan temples followed Mon prototypes, but by the 12th century, distinctively Burmese styles emerged.
The hollow gu-style temple had interior chambers and corridors, deliberately dim for meditation and worship.
The exteriors were covered in elaborate stucco decoration, depicting scenes from the Buddha's life and incarnations.
Inside the temples, the walls were covered with murals, executing Buddhist cosmology and Jataka tales.
These paintings are visual records of medieval Burmese culture, how people dressed and what rituals were performed.
The kingdom's sculptors created colossal seated and standing Buddhas that were then covered in gold leaf.
Early images show Mon influence, while later Burmese styles have more angular, inwardly focused expressions.
But let's step back from the art and ask what the pagan kingdom was actually like as a functioning state.
The Kingdom of Pagan controlled most of present-day Myanmar, ruling over Burmese, Mon, Shan, and Pew peoples.
The economy was fundamentally agrarian. Rice production supported the royal court and the necessary armies.
Inscriptions record elaborate systems of land grants transferred from royal control to religious institutions.
By the 13th century, a significant portion of pagans' productive land was controlled by temples and monasteries.
These grants were tax-exempt, meaning the religious establishment accumulated substantial wealth over time.
Some scholars argued excessive temple construction weakened pagan economically, undermining the crown's revenue base.
But recent scholarship challenges this. Temple estates weren't unproductive. They generated substantial surplus.
Temples served administrative functions, providing education, medical care, and social services locally. The actual collapse of the pagan kingdom came suddenly, and the cause was external rather than internal. The Mongols, having conquered China, turned their attention southward toward Pagan.
The pagan king, Narathihabate, made the catastrophically poor decision to execute the Mongol envoys.
In 1277 and 1283, Mongol Chinese armies invaded, defeating pagan forces in battle.
Shan groups rebelled. The Mon in the south reasserted independence. By 1300, the kingdom had ceased to exist.
The pagan city itself was largely abandoned.
The great temple building stopped abruptly after the 1280s.
The city didn't die completely. Monks continued to inhabit some monasteries, maintaining the most important shrines.
For the next 5 centuries, Pagan existed in a kind of liminal state, not completely abandoned.
In the 18th and 19th centuries, the Konbaung dynasty renewed some interest in Pagan as heritage.
Then came colonialism. British scholars and archaeologists were stunned by what they found at Pagan. British officers wrote accounts describing the thousands of temples, comparing Pagan favorably to Angkor.
Colonial discourse shaped interpretations, often arguing temples needed Indian guidance, unable to credit indigenous Asians.
More problematically, British administrators and soldiers sometimes damaged the site or vandalized sculptures.
Colonial photographs show officers treating ancient monuments as scenic backdrops for imperial tourism.
Myanmar faced insurgencies and economic challenges. The site languished under military rule after 1962.
The site deteriorated from neglect and increasing earthquake damage during decades of isolation.
Major restoration efforts resumed in the 1990s as the military government sought to develop tourism.
But these efforts have been deeply controversial, prioritizing visual impressiveness over authentic conservation.
Restorations have often been reconstructions, essentially creating modern simulacra of the original fabric.
Who decides conservation priority? Archaeologists, government, or tourists whose fees fund preservation?
UNESCO delayed inscription until 2019 due to concerns about authenticity and integrity issues caused by restoration.
Now, let's address the central question. Why is Pagan so little known outside Southeast Asia? First, Myanmar's isolation in the late 20th century meant tourists couldn't visit. Scholars couldn't study.
While Angkor Wat gained fame through media, Pagan remained hidden behind Myanmar's closed borders.
Second, Pagan lacks a single iconic structure that can serve as a powerful symbol for recognition.
Its power is cumulative, the overwhelming impression of thousands of temples. But that doesn't reduce well.
Third, Myanmar has a lower international profile than Thailand or Indonesia. Fewer people are exposed to its history.
Fourth, Pagan doesn't fit neatly into Western narratives of great empires or origins of civilization.
It's a genuinely indigenous Southeast Asian civilization at its peak, outside common historical organization frameworks.
The region appears primarily in relation to colonialism or modern wars, not sophisticated indigenous history.
This ignorance is not politically neutral. It reinforces narratives of passive, underdeveloped regions.
When people don't know, Myanmar had sophisticated Buddhist scholarship, while Europe was in the High Middle Ages.
The temples of Pagan stand as a silent rebuke to this ignorance, demonstrating undeniable achievements. They show sophisticated engineering, complex artistic programs, and deep religious thinking.
They prove that a societal organization capable of sustaining massive construction projects across centuries existed.
Walking through the quieter sections, you encounter a landscape that is both melancholic and inspiring.
Melancholic because so much has been lost. Murals faded, stucco decoration mostly eroded.
But inspiring because what survives is still overwhelming, still beautiful, still capable of conveying ambition. Climb to the upper terraces of one of the taller temples at sunrise.
You'll see the landscape emerge from darkness, spire after spire.
Each one representing someone's hopes for spiritual liberation, each one a prayer in brick.
In that moment, the historical distance collapses. You're standing in the presence of living faith.
Focus your team on this quadrant. The pottery shards suggest an earlier settlement phase right here.
I see. Should we adjust the depth markers then?
Art historians are documenting and analyzing the murals, tracing stylistic development precisely.
Epigraphers are working through thousands of inscriptions, extracting data about donors and social organization. Each research season adds to our understanding, slowly building a more complete picture of the civilization. But some things will remain forever lost. The wooden palace of the pagan kings has left no trace.
What we're left with are the temples, 2,000 witnesses to a vanished kingdom.
The Kingdom of Pagan built more temples than ancient Egypt built pyramids, a scale comparable to Europe.
Its obscurity is not a judgment on its significance, but an indictment of global historical representation.
The temples stand patient as the centuries pass, weathering earthquakes and monsoons.
They host pilgrims and tourists, holding their secrets and slowly revealing them to those who look.
Pagan is not forgotten by the Burmese people, who still venerate these sites as living religious spaces.
It is not forgotten by scholars who recognize its importance, who slowly build a complete picture.
It is only forgotten by a wider world that has not yet learned to see beyond the narrow focus of Eurocentric history.
That the Irrawaddy Valley in the 12th century was as culturally vibrant as Paris or Cairo.
Myanmar's temple builders achieved something as remarkable as anything in medieval Europe or the Islamic world.
The investigation continues, the temples endure, and slowly, Pagan is beginning to receive recognition. Not as an exotic curiosity, but as one of the great civilizations of medieval Asia.
Their stone prayers still rising toward.
We begin where the land dictates all things, the lifeblood of the region.
This seemingly empty landscape supported an empire of stone and faith.
The arid scrubland belies the religious intensity that once bloomed here.
These structures are not just built upon the earth. They seem to erupt from it.
Each brick represents a calculated, costly act of merit-making centuries ago.
The aspiration toward liberation dictated the very shape of their architecture.
Time is relentless, even against the hardest brick and mortar.
When the mist rises, it is easy to believe these are monuments from a forgotten age.
2,000 structures, the sheer volume defeats easy comprehension.
The faces of the Buddhas remain still.
The landscape illustrates a social structure built around religious patronage.
The artistry here rivals any medieval court's decorative ambition.
We are only now beginning to accurately quantify the scope of this endeavor.
Entering these halls is like stepping into the physical manifestation of concentrated religious thought.
The murals offer rich, colorful glimpses into a society that vanished.
For the local people, These are not ruins, but active sacred spaces requiring maintenance.
The wealth that fueled this building came directly from the fertility of this river valley.
The Irrawaddy connected Pagan, an agrarian power, to wider maritime trade routes.
King Anaurata transformed Pagan by acquiring the Mon's existing Buddhist infrastructure. The Mon provided the framework, the texts, the scholarship, the architectural blueprints.
Pali, Sanskrit, these were the languages of high religious and intellectual discourse imported wholesale.
This cultural dependence is visible in the earliest architectural styles that emerged at Pagan. Over time, the Burmese language asserted itself, crystallizing a distinct cultural identity.
But the Mon foundation remained the initial cultural DNA of the kingdom.
Why did this merit-making transform into an industrial-scale building project?
The pursuit of positive karma, merit-making, was essential for breaking the cycle of rebirth.
For royalty, this translated into commissioning monuments on a terrifying scale.
A king who built magnificently proved he was a righteous ruler, a true Dharmaraja.
These temples were not just prayers. They were political advertisements of piety and resource control.
The competitive element meant later rulers often built bigger, more elaborate monuments to surpass their predecessors.
Wealth was channeled into permanent religious architecture, bypassing luxury goods.
Architecturally, the kingdom innovated, developing the hollow gu-style temple form.
The interior spaces were deliberately dark, filtering the light for reverence and meditation.
The exteriors were narratives molded in stucco, deities and mythical creatures guarding the sacred space.
The murals inside are perhaps the most extensive collection of medieval Buddhist art in the world.
They are historical documents showing how society was organized and how royalty dressed.
The towering images inside required complex engineering to support their immense size.
From 10-meter giants to smaller images arranged in orderly niches for continuous worship.
The temples reveal culture, but what about the practicalities of governing this vast, multi-ethnic empire?
Pagan ruled over diverse groups: Burmese, Mon, Shan, and various hill peoples united by force. The primary mechanism was the extraction of surplus rice from the productive central plains.
Inscriptions show land grants, transferring whole villages tax-exempt to religious institutions.
This accumulation of tax-exempt land created fiscal problems for the royal court over time.
The classic theory suggests excessive piety bankrupted the state by shrinking the taxable base.
But the timeline doesn't fully support this. Construction was prolific right before the collapse.
Temples also acted as vital local centers of authority and provided essential social services.
The true undoing came not from internal fiscal mismanagement, but from the Yuan dynasty.
The Mongols demanded submission from King Narathihappate in the 1270s.
The king's choice to execute the Mongol envoys guaranteed massive retaliation.
Mongol armies invaded in the late 1270s and 1280s, shattering Pagan's military reputation.
The king fled south after military defeat, leading to the collapse of centralized royal authority.
Shan states rebelled in the north. Mon regions regained full autonomy in the south. The city did not fall to sack, but to irrelevance. Major construction ceased completely after the 1280s.
Pagan became a ghost city, a place of memory rather than administration.
Pilgrims continued to visit the more famous shrines over the subsequent centuries.
Later, the Konbaung dynasty showed some interest, viewing Pagan as a symbol of unified Buddhist heritage.
British conquest brought Western scholars who were profoundly impressed by the scale of the ruins. They immediately began comparing Pagan favorably to other great Asian monuments they knew.
However, some writers could not credit indigenous genius, insisting on heavy Indian guidance.
Military use and souvenir hunting led to tangible damage across the site during the occupation years.
Colonial preservation efforts were often half-hearted, frequently employing destructive, inappropriate materials.
After independence, the focus immediately shifted to national security and internal conflict.
The site languished, temples deteriorating from neglect, especially after major earthquakes.
The 2016 earthquake severely damaged hundreds of structures, accelerating deterioration.
By the 1990s, restoration resumed, driven by the desire to attract international tourism revenue.
This restoration prioritized visual impact, often resulting in historically inaccurate reconstructions.
Conservationists argue these methods fundamentally compromise the site's historical integrity.
It forces the question, do we preserve ruins or reconstruct the image of what was lost?
These are not easy questions, and at Pagan, they remain deeply contested among all stakeholders.
The site was finally inscribed as a World Heritage Site in 2019, despite previous UNESCO objections.
The inscription came with conditions requiring improved, more authentic conservation practices.
How does this ancient legacy fit into contemporary Myanmar? Now we return to the core mystery. Why global obscurity?
Myanmar's relative geopolitical isolation for decades meant Pagan was physically and culturally unreachable.
While neighbors built tourism pipelines, Pagan remained locked behind closed borders.
Angkor Wat has its singular, instantly recognizable visual symbol. Pagan does not. The fame of Pagan is the sum of its parts, which doesn't reduce well to a single photograph.
Pagan suffers from being located in a country that few people outside the region know much about.
It falls outside standard Western historical narratives focused on Rome or the high medieval empires. It's an indigenous Southeast Asian peak, which often pushes it to the periphery of global focus. The most fundamental reason is simply that most of the West ignores Southeast Asian deep history.
Most people learn nothing about this region in school, reducing it to colonial footnotes.
This gap in knowledge reinforces narratives that position the region as historically passive or backward.
Pagan proves that Southeast Asians achieved immense architectural and artistic feats without European assistance.
It displays sophisticated engineering and societal organization, capable of massive, sustained projects. Pagan proves on the history of civilization is far more diverse and geographically distributed than often admitted. To walk here is to feel both the inspiration of the builders and the melancholy of loss. So much of the context, the living city, has been erased by time and neglect.
Yet, what survives is still overwhelming, still conveying raw artistic ambition.
We must look upward again, to feel the same awe as the original pilgrims.
Temples stand witness to the sun's daily journey across the sky, 8 centuries now.
Archaeologists continue to map the ground, discovering new dimensions of how Pagan functioned.
They work to reconstruct the secular center that vanished entirely from sight.
Every inscription translated reveals more about donors, social rank, and religious practice.
Yet the true depth of their philosophy, their unwritten scholarship, is likely lost forever. We are left with the stone, the enduring physical testament of their devotion.
Pagan built more temples than Egypt built pyramids, a staggering feat of collective will.
Its scale of religious patronage rivals medieval Christian Europe's great cathedrals.
This artistic legacy ranks among humanity's finest achievements, yet remains marginalized.
The local people have never forgotten the importance of these sacred places.
It is only the wider global consciousness that has failed to recognize its true standing.
The temples stand patient, weathering the storms, hosting the flow of time.
They hold their secrets, slowly yielding them to dedicated study and patient observation.
Pagan is a rebuke to historical narratives that limit human genius geographically.
Slowly, perhaps, Pagan is beginning to receive the global recognition it has always deserved.
Not as an exotic curiosity, but as a core structure in medieval Asian history.
Myanmar's forgotten temple builders are finally beginning to be remembered.
Their stone prayers still rise toward the sky, waiting to be heard. The plains are vast, the landscape unforgivingly dry and exposed.
Water was life, yet they built monuments that seemed to defy the environment.
Each small stupa represents a family's entire savings dedicated to a spiritual ledger.
Modern repairs often stand out starkly against the ancient, weathered texture.
The geometry of these hollow temples was complex, demanding high mathematical skill.
We see the ghost of color, where dazzling murals once detailed the cosmos.
From afar, they appear as unified golden beacons in the haze. For the faithful, the stone objects retain living spiritual power. The shadows of the great temples fall upon the smaller, more humble acts of devotion.
The narratives remain sealed within the lost languages of Mon and early Burmese.
That rice surplus, generated along the river banks, was the ultimate source of all this building.
The same agricultural rhythms sustained the empire then, and sustain the local life now. Anawrahta wasn't just a conqueror. He was a cultural engineer of immense scope. He moved the entire literate, religious infrastructure of the Mon northwards.
Architectural sophistication was not invented there. It was imported and adapted.
The dual inscription practice shows the initial religious hierarchy, clearly reflected in stone.
This was the philosophy that fueled the construction, the drive for spiritual advancement.
Royal patronage was essential. It legitimized power through visible devotion to the Dharma.
Each succeeding ruler felt compelled to leave a more magnificent, more karmically powerful monument.
The artisans achieved a fluidity in their work rarely matched in contemporary Asia.
These spaces were designed not for crowds, but for profound, solitary contemplation.
Look closely at the murals. They are primary sources for daily life, rarely seen elsewhere.
Water damage, smoke, and neglect have severely compromised this irreplaceable painted library.
This highly centralized religious focus was supported by a complex, multi-ethnic military state. The continuous devotion ultimately strained the crown's ability to fund external defense.
The execution of the envoys eliminated any possibility of diplomatic survival.
The flight of the court was abrupt. The city's vibrant function simply ceased.
Once the political center vanished, the massive construction program stopped overnight.
The civilization was gone, leaving behind a spectacular, silent graveyard of faith.
The Victorians catalogued pagan, but their interpretations were heavily filtered by empire.
Art objects were removed, inscriptions catalogued, but the living context was ignored. Early preservation efforts were often driven by an aesthetic preference, not conservation science.
This pattern of inappropriate restoration continued, sometimes escalating in recent decades.
The locals wrestle with the desire for tourism income versus the need for architectural honesty.
Every intervention leaves a physical, chronological scar on the ancient fabric.
It is a Sisyphean task to maintain 2,000 structures against tropical decay.
If we rebuild it perfectly, is it still Pagan, or just a very large replica?
Why did this extraordinary achievement fail to capture the world's imagination like Angkor?
In the attention economy, quantity of monuments often loses to singular iconic representation.
Black. There is no single postcard image that defines the entire pagan experience.
Myanmar itself carries a lower global cultural footprint than its neighbors, historically and presently. If the country is unknown, its greatest historical achievement remains doubly obscured.
Pagan was contemporaneous with European centers, operating at an equivalent cultural peak.
This proves the existence of sophisticated, non-Western centers of learning during that time.
This historical ignorance isn't accidental. It stems from established Eurocentric frameworks.
The temples stand as physical proof against narratives of Western superiority.
They show devotion, artistry, and organizational capability on a scale unmatched in the region.
Venture beyond the main routes, and the weight of history becomes palpable.
There is a profound sense of continuity here, despite political collapse.
The entire civilization was geared towards religious accumulation, not merely earthly wealth. The river witnessed everything: the rise, the height, and the final, sudden fragmentation.
The debate over restoration is central to how we define respect for the dead.
For the monastic community, the temples are functional spiritual tools.
Their prayers still ascend, visible in the swirling patterns of incense smoke.
It is a landscape built entirely on aspiration, brick by brick.
Even the way royalty represented itself changed as the Burmese identity solidified.
Ultimately, the pagodas proved more enduring than the armies that protected them.
The finest surviving art captures the essence of their deep spiritual focus.
We see the surviving 2,000, but we must imagine the other 8,000 that are gone.
Monsoons and earthquakes are constant, powerful reminders of impermanence.
Millions of pixels capture the scene, yet the experience remains largely unshared globally.
The local guides are the crucial link, translating the stones for the few who venture here.
To draw Pagan is to attempt to conquer its overwhelming visual complexity.
Further out, untouched ruins still hold secrets, waiting for the next dedicated scholar.
The medieval engineering that allowed these structures to stand for centuries remains impressive.
These small traces of color hold the key to understanding their aesthetic world.
The choice between reconstruction and ruin preservation defines the site's future presentation. If the stones speak, the manuscripts whisper warnings about impermanence.
Pagan challenges us to decenter our historical focus and embrace global complexity.
4 directions, 4 gazes, watching the world change around them. It is a city built of prayers that still dominate the horizon.
To understand Pagan is to accept that world history is far richer than we teach.
The kingdom may have fragmented politically, but its spiritual architecture endures. The river flows on, indifferent to the rise and fall of kings and capitals. Each carving confirms a personal stake in the kingdom's spiritual ambition.
The conservation battle is a race against nature and time itself.
For the children here, these are simply part of their landscape, their inheritance. It all comes down to earth, brick, and human belief, layered over centuries. The silent witnesses endure, waiting for the world to turn its eyes here.
The stone prayers rise again, ready for the light.
Pagan deserves its place among the greatest achievements of human civilization.
We must ensure the forgotten builders are finally remembered.
Look closely at the craftsmanship that defined a millennium.
The investigation continues, layer by layer, stone by stone.
The knowledge is growing, slowly chipping away at global historical oversight.
The engineering here speaks volumes about their mastery of material and space.
There is nowhere to hide the damage, the history, or the effort.
The Irrawaddy Valley holds one of humanity's great, rediscovered histories.
Pagan endures. Listen now.